Hello and welcome back to Pop Culture Graveyard. I am Hollis, and this week I'm taking a deep dive on Aerosmith. No small feat. We all have a favorite Aerosmith. My favorite Aerosmith is classic, original Aerosmith. Apologies if that's not your Aerosmith, but I'm going to cover everything. And a big thank you to everyone who's subscribed. If you have not yet subscribed, please think about hitting the button and ringing the bell if you enjoy this episode. Before we get started, big announcement, I've started a Patreon so that you can support the channel, and if you join the Patreon, you will be getting super cool secret content. Don't ask about it. You'll get outtakes, you'll get record reviews, you'll get blogs, you'll get vlogs. It's going to be fun. If you would like to visit my Patreon and support the channel, I am putting a link right underneath in the description. Now, on with the show. So in order to keep this video down to an edible length, with a band as massive as Aerosmith, I'm not going to get into the biography of Aerosmith. I'm just going to stick to the music. If you're on the hunt for a biography, I highly recommend Walk This Way. It's the definitive oral history of Aerosmith, and it covers all of their peak years. I ended up enjoying Joe Perry's entries on Walk This Way so much that I picked up Rocks, Joe Perry's life in and out of Aerosmith. It is a fun read, and between the two biographies, you should have everything you could want and more about the band. The classic lineup of Aerosmith is Steven Tyler on lead vocals and piano, and sometimes drums and sometimes bass, and anything else he wants to pick up. Kind of a virtuoso guy. Joe Perry on lead guitar, Brad Whitford on rhythm guitar and second lead guitar, Tom Hamilton on bass, and Joey Kramer on drums. Clive Davis himself signed the band to Columbia Records, and in January of 1973 the band released Aerosmith. This self-titled debut was produced by Adrian Barber. Adrian was the engineer on the Velvet Underground Loaded album, but you may know Adrian best as the man who recorded the Beatles live at the Five Star Club in Hamburg, Germany, back when he was stage manager for the club. Anyway, there are only 8 songs on this album, but it's almost 36 minutes of music. That tells you how much of a jam band Aerosmith was back when they got started. Steven Tyler is not a big fan of this album because he feels like he was trying a different voice on different tracks. Is it wrong that that's one of the reasons I like it? From the second the lead track Make It kicks in, one thing is clear. This is a heavy guitar band who knows how to groove. Steven's vocals are funky as hell, and when they begin to intertwine with Joe Perry's guitar lines, it's the birth of a magical formula that will see the band conquer the world. This track features perhaps Joey Kramer's best drumming on the entire album. Steven, who was a drummer himself, was very hard on Joey Kramer, but I feel he's rock solid throughout. Make It is the perfect opening track. Somebody is a dirty and delicious track that sees the band locked into one of their signature grooves. One of their earliest songs, already road-tested and tightened, Somebody features stellar guitar interplay between Joe and Brad. It's got a very unique tremolo-voiced Steven on the recording, which to my ears shows a real Mark Bolan influence. I think it's a great track. The third song on here is Dream On. What can I say about Dream On? It's an epic ballad from a band that would bring you a lot more epic ballads. But this is the first, and it can hold its head up every bit as worthy of adulation as Stairway to Heaven, let alone Show Me the Way. Just keep dreaming until that dream comes true. Barry Rogers and Hammerstein. That's Steven playing the mellotron on Dream On, which is a very primitive sort of synthesizer, which gives you an orchestra at your fingertips. Joe Perry was never a big fan of the song. I loved the song. It may have gone a little underappreciated in its time, but its time would later come. One Way Street is a rocking track about a girl who's headed down a bad street. I believe she's headed towards becoming a lady of the night. The lyrics seem to be shaming her a bit. All I will say is, this was written in the 70s. It was a different time. Side 2 kicks off with the classic track Mamakin, with a far longer intro than you may be used to in live versions. If Dream On is the big song off side 1, Mamakin is the heavy hitter off side 2. A live staple for years, all of the song's best elements are already in place. This version has got some saxophone, which I feel the track does not need, but the band is smart enough to allow the guitars to be front and center on the stop-start choruses. Mamakin is my favorite track on this album. Write Me is next, and it's the second of only 2 songs on this album, along with Mamakin, that features saxophone. This time though, the saxophone, played by David Woodford, is a really snug fit. The song's subject finds himself away so long, suicide's crossing his mind. But a letter apparently would stop him from going insane. Would somebody write this guy already? The track Movin' Out is as close as we get on this album to the band's bluesy rattlesnake shake beginnings. It's a very biographical track about the band launching themselves finally into a recording and touring rock band. The first song that Joe and Steven wrote together, Movin' Out's lyrics encapsulate a pure wish fulfillment that was about to be theirs. Living like a king off the fat of the land, working like a dog in a rock and roll band. Rufus Thomas's Walkin' the Dog is the only cover song on this album, but the band really makes it their own with a gritty rendering. Sequencing wise, I can think of a lot better ways to end this album, as this cover is pretty anticlimactic. I would have gone with Write Me or Movin' Out, each of which have a sort of Goodbye Cruel World quality. All in all though, given how nervous they were in the studio for the first time, this is a respectable studio album. In March of 1974, the band release, Get Your Wings. Get Your Wings sees the first appearance of ace producer Jack Douglas. Jack would become very important to the band and almost became like a sixth member. Get Your Wings is their second album with 8 songs on it, clocking in this time at 38 minutes. So don't let the track list fool you. You get a lot of bang for your buck with Aerosmith. From the opening track, Same Old Song and Dance, it's clear that the band made a leap forward in sound and attitude. A year on the road touring a major label album left the band with enough riffs and lyrical concepts to make a track like Same Old Song and Dance, which has as much James Brown swagger as it does mid-70s Rolling Stones grit. Lord of the Thighs, aside from being a clever, if obvious, play on words, is a humorous but sexy take on a pimp. If you get lost in the lyrical gymnastics, you might lose sight of the fact that this is some pretty sophisticated music for the boys, built on a sexy piano rumble that has a little Stevie Nicks Edge of 17 vibe to it. This track perhaps features more instruments and production than others on the album, but it all works. Spaced is a fun track that very quickly became a live fan favorite. I believe the lyrics are about losing yourself in drugs, though that's a pretty safe bet for any Aerosmith song meaning during these years. But in this case, I'm fairly confident. As Aerosmith's songs about females go, Woman of the World is a fairly sweet song about a lady who the song's subject simply cannot connect with. To me, it's almost somewhat of a sister song to the debut album's One Way Street. My favorite lyrics are, she got big-eyed cats, she got coats of sable. She seats 44 at her dinner table. SOS kicks off side 2 and is my pick for the most underrated song on the album. It became a live staple for the band, and as anyone who bought Aerosmith bootlegs can attest to, the song kicks ass live. The chorus is one of their most fun yet, cause I'm a lonely schoolboy, and I'm a rat, and it's too bad I can't get me none of that. Simple yet sizzling, the ideal Aerosmith track. Train Kept A-Rolling is a cover of the standard made popular by the Yardbirds, which is a brilliant choice of song for Aerosmith as it showcases the guitar interplay between Brad Whitford and Joe Perry. However, Joe and Brad don't play guitars on this track. It's actually 2 studio aces named Steve Hunter and Dick Wagner. You may know them for their fantastic guitar work on Lou Reed's live Rock and Roll Animal album. Just listen to Sweet Jane on that to hear what I'm talking about. Anyway, Steve and Dick were brought in, probably because Joe and Brad were too burnt out after a year on the road to play with enough fire for this track. Brad and Joe did contribute guitar parts, but it was left up to Jack Douglas, the producer, to decide which guitar parts to use and how much of it. So you're hearing a hybrid of sorts. Most likely Joe and Brad in the beginning slower section, and then later Steve and Dick in the later fiery sped up solo section. In any case, Joe and Brad had no problem performing the song live for years. And being that Jeff Beck was Joe's guitar idol, he did his hero proud on all live concert versions. Speaking of which, the song's fake live ambiance, it really adds to the excitement of the track. Speaking of which, that live concert atmosphere was lifted from a George Harrison Concert for Bangladesh album. Hare Krishna, everybody. Seasons of Wither is Joe Perry's favorite slow song by Aerosmith, and I can hear why. It's got the wistfulness of Dream On without any of the histrionics. The song conjures up a feeling that's equal parts nostalgia and melancholia as the lyrics speak to the cycle of life. I think Seasons of Wither would have been a great way to end this album rather than the track that follows it, Pandora's Box. In general, Pandora's Box has a B-side feel to it, rather than something that should take up almost 6 minutes of the band's sophomore album. To me, this is the LP's one misstep. The song started with Joey Kramer. He co-wrote it with Steven Tyler. It features both tenor and soprano sax, and piano by Steven, and I think it's a pretty anticlimactic way to end an album this good. In April of 1975, the boys released Toys in the Attic. Jack Douglas is back in the producer's chair, and you can hear why in the opening seconds of the title track, Toys in the Attic. There's the affected sound of a hi-hat cymbal being sucked backwards as the band launches into the song at breakneck speed. It's a fantastic way to open one of 3 Aerosmith classics on this album, and the band would click jump to the major leagues with this LP. Uncle Salty is an ode to a whorehouse, with Steven Tyler embodying the character of the titular Madam. Written by Tom Hamilton and Steven Tyler, this is a tasty, laid-back track with some gorgeous harmonies. Adam's Apple is a guitar-heavy Garden of Eden-based track, whose ballsy blues wouldn't be out of place on the debut album. Walk This Way is another all-time classic for the band. It begins with a drum beat that's not all that dissimilar as the one on the previous album's Lord of the Thighs, but both the composition and production of this track is light years ahead of that one. Joe Perry wanted to create a guitar track that was as funky as anything that James Brown and the Meters were putting out back then, and this track ably accomplished that feat. When it came time for Steven to write the lyrics to this track, the rest of the band, who had just come back from seeing Young Frankenstein, insisted that the track be called Walk This Way. Steven has a gift for writing sexually explicit lyrics that are still safe enough to be played on AM radio, and he outdid himself on this track. By the time the backstroking lover finds himself down on a muffin, we're still in the first minute of the song. Walk This Way was a big hit for the band. Big 10-inch Record is a cover version of an old-timey song that is so faithful to the original, I don't see the point of it, other than Steven loves a good dick joke. Sequencing-wise, it's a real nightmare, leaving listeners at the end of side 1 not still humming the final chorus of Walk This Way, but rather asking themselves what the hell they just listened to. Side 2 kicks off with the third classic on this album, Sweet Emotion, based on a riff that bassist Tom Hamilton had been playing around with since his high school days. Sweet Emotion is perhaps Aerosmith's greatest all-time track. In any case, I defy you to picture the opening of the film Dazed and Confused with any other song. The song basically has 3 major parts: a slow, groovy, and seductive opening, a hard-rocking middle, and finally, a blistering ending where the guitars go into overdrive. In a final stroke of genius, Joe Perry decided to use an airbag to mouth the words Sweet Emotion, which put one more unique stamp on this song. It would be the one track I'd play to get anyone into Aerosmith. No More, No More is an underrated track on this album, and its guitar sound points the way to where they're headed on their next album. Steven's lyrics speak to the boredom of a rock star's life on the road. At the same time, it also celebrates the dreamlike escapism that stardom affords you. Round and Round is the heaviest sounding track on this album. It started out when Brad brought a riff to producer Jack Douglas, and with some lyrics from Steven, Jack helped shepherd Round and Round into the track you hear on this album. Album closer, You See Me Crying, is in my opinion the hidden gem on this album. Steven wrote the song with his friend Don Solomon, who he had played with in a 60s band called The Chain Reaction. It features a string orchestra, but don't let that fool you. It still rocks. Starting out very sweet and wistful, it very soon turns epic, and is one of the more moving pieces of music Aerosmith ever recorded. And it is a perfect album ender. Incidentally, You See Me Crying was released as the final single from Toys in the Attic in November. It did not do well. So in December, one of the band's managers, David Krebs, convinced the record company to re-release Dream On from the first album as a single. And it became Aerosmith's first top 10 record, peaking at number 6. Finally getting the attention it deserved after 2 years. In May of 1976, the band released Rocks. Yeah, they do. Gonna be one hell of a bicentennial. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached Aerosmith's high water mark. This is widely considered Aerosmith's best album, and one of the greatest rock albums of the 70s. By this time, Aerosmith was one of the biggest acts in America. They were in their prime, and they were always on the road. Rocks was highly anticipated by the fans. While most bands at the time aspired to eventually see their album go platinum, which at the time meant 1 million sold, Rocks actually shipped platinum and was sometimes selling over 10,000 units a day. This album begins with one of the greatest lead-off tracks of all time, Back in the Saddle. The band and producer Jack Douglas wanted a track that would tell the fans that they were back, and Steven used the old Roy Rogers song title as the basis for this song. Recorded with a shotgun microphone, the vocals are some of Steven's best, and the multi-layered guitars are overwhelming without sounding crowded. Joe Perry wrote the main riff on a 6-string bass, lying on his back while stoned on heroin. Don't try that at home. This man is a professional. Last Child is one of my all-time favorite Aerosmith tracks, exuding a slick, streetwise funkiness. Written by Brad Whitford with lyrical help from Steven, Last Child starts out with a slow and intriguing intro, before launching into one of the tastiest grooves the boys would ever inhabit. Brad and Joe's guitar interplay really drives the song, with Brad's brilliant guitar solo being the icing on top. Last Child was the first single from Rocks, and it peaked at number 21 on the charts. Rats in the Cellar is the band's flip-side take on Toys in the Attic. It basically describes the band's current life on drugs, and musically it takes its inspiration from a Yardbirds-style rave-up that to today's listener might sound closer to some sort of prototype thrash metal. This manic track is one of the most visceral songs ever about drug addiction. It literally creates the feeling of a jittery junkie rushing to cop. Combination is a Joe Perry number on which Joe sings lead, even though Steven works hard to overpower him with backing vocals. Joe has described the song Combination as being about heroin, cocaine, and me. It's one of the coolest songs on the album. It features the classic couplet, "Walking on Gucci, wearing Saint Laurent, barely stay on, cause I'm so fucking gaunt." Joe was 129 pounds at that point. Kids, don't do drugs. Sick as a Dog was another song that started with Tom's Sweet Emotion Hamilton, and it's one of my favorite tracks on the album. Tom wrote the song on guitar, so when it was time to record, Tom played guitar along with Brad, and Joe switched over to bass. For the end of the song, when Joe played the fuzzy guitar solo, he handed the bass over to Steven, who played bass for the end of the track. Yeah, I don't know why they all couldn't just play together and overdub that shit either. I think it's just another indication of what a master producer they had in Jack Douglas, that he could stitch tracks together, jigsaw puzzle-like. And it worked. There's a breakdown that happens almost 3 minutes into the song. That's my favorite part of Sick as a Dog. The band just sits in the sexy, spacey pocket for about a half a minute before launching into the song again, this time with hand claps and extra guitar overdubs. It's a killer song. Nobody's Fault may be the best song ever about earthquakes. It even sounds a little like an earthquake. Lyrically, Steven is singing about a worst-case scenario for a fault line in New Jersey that runs underneath a nuclear power plant. Get the Let Out was another funky rock workout. This track features backing vocals by a tenor from the Metropolitan Opera, doubling Steven on the no, 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 no parts. That's a pretty high-maintenance move to pull for a song with some of Steven's laziest lyrics. He literally sings the words, "Hey good lookin', what you got there cookin'?" But this track isn't meant to be read in a library. It's the music that shines here, and it really hits you below the belt. What? I mean your hips, you sick fuck. It's funky as fuck. Lickin' a Promise is one of the most advanced tracks musically on this LP, with stellar guitar work from Brad and Joe, and really fun lyrics from Steven. It's basically another song about life in a successful rock and roll band, but with a much more positive spin than Rats in the Cellar. This song is Steven's ode to winning over an audience every night. Home Tonight is the album closer, and my favorite ballad that Aerosmith ever did. There's a wistfulness here that's present on all of their best ballads. It's a sweet, slight song that somehow sounds epic. And the way Steven's vocals here, which are soft, a bit exhausted, and loving, bookend with his vocals on the opener Back in the Saddle, which were angry, energized, and demanding, work perfectly. Home Tonight brings down the curtain on a perfect album. Speaking of which, there are no outtakes, because the band was so successful that after recording, they had to get right back out on the road. And so I love that re-releases of Rocks have no bonus tracks. Fans today get the same succinct 9-song statement from the band that fans in 1976 got. You don't mess with a perfect album, not even in repackaging. Every album they make after this will be compared to Rocks. Unfortunately, after Rocks, the band's creativity hopped in the back seat and let drugs take the wheel for a while. Which brings us to December of 1977, the band release, Draw the Line. The line referred to in the title could be a line of cocaine. It could be the lines on your arm from track marks from heroin. It could be the line drawing on the cover by famed caricaturist Hirschfeld. It could be imaginary lines that the band members were all crossing with each other. Or it could be a line separating Aerosmith's greatest work from what was to come. Regardless of what the title means, the title track, Draw the Line, is a kick-ass lead-off track. The band would often open concerts with it on this album's tour and beyond. Draw the Line was the first single from the album, and it only made it up to number 42 on the Billboard charts. Draw the Line is a classic Aerosmith track. Unfortunately, the rest of the album doesn't quite live up to that. I Want to Know Why is a fine, bluesy number, but musically it's sort of a laid-back knockoff of something they did much better on Lickin' a Promise. Critical Mass is another Stonesy number that is heavy on harmonica but light on originality. When the band played Critical Mass live, though, it's a much better track. Get It Up was a real missed opportunity for the band. Musically, the song is fantastic. It features an irresistible rhythm, a wall of guitars, and really sinister production. That is unfortunately undercut by flaccid lyrics. Thousands of kids at a concert don't want to sing along with a chorus that goes, "Can't get it up," but the music rocks. Bright Light Fright is a tight Joe Perry rocker about keeping the sunlight at bay as you try to keep the non-stop nighttime party going. Joe sings lead on this track, and I think it's the hidden gem on this album. It's one of the more energetic tracks on this LP, and it just goes to highlight how Joe was the only member of the band who saw punk rock as more than just a passing trend. It was used as the B-side to the Draw the Line single. Kings and Queens has the power slot of side 2, track 1, and it doesn't disappoint. The band, minus Joe Perry, wrote the song with producer Jack Douglas, who even plays mandolin. Brad Whitford plays a blistering solo towards the end that for me is the highlight of the song. I think Kings and Queens is a great song, and it was the second single released from the LP. If you only know Kings and Queens from the Greatest Hits LP, I implore you to seek out the original album or the single version. The Greatest Hits version severely edits down some of the guitar parts, so you're not getting the whole song. The cover of Milk Cow Blues should give you a hint to how exhausted and creatively spent the band was during this period. It's a credible version because it's right in Aerosmith's wheelhouse, but it's kind of pointless. And coming on the heels of Rocks, where they had the album closer Be Home Tonight, Milk Cow Blues just doesn't get the job done. Anyone who watches this channel on a regular basis knows I'm very big on sequencing. I think it can make or break an album. I think if these songs were in a different order, it could have masked this album's flaws for a few more very important months, allowing the band to sell a lot more albums. My side one would have been Draw the Line, Sight for Sore Eyes, Bright Light Fright, The Hand That Feeds, and Kings and Queens. That to me is a great side one. If you give fans one great side of music, they're very forgiving. They'll tell people they love the album, they just don't listen to side 2. In October of 1978, the band released Live, Bootleg. This double album of live tracks from previous tours is seen as a missed opportunity by some. Aerosmith was a great live unit. They had state-of-the-art equipment, they had tight road-tested material, and they had a great sound man in Nightbob. With some care, they could have put out a classic double live album. Instead, the band got cute. The band's concept was to give their fans the illegal live bootleg concert experience, even though it's released on a major label. That means shitty artwork, complete with fake coffee stains, not every song listed, and most mystifying of all, lousy sound quality. The best part of the package is the inside array of photos of the band performing live. My favorite shot is of Joe Perry with one guitar slung behind him while he plays the other with his back to the audience. Steven wanted Joe to do this as much as possible because he said it looked really cool. And it does. Though not listed in the credits, Draw the Line is included after the cover of James Brown's Mother Popcorn. Speaking of covers, it's got a sizzling and seductive take on Come Together, far grittier than the one they recorded earlier that year for use in the ill-fated film Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. There are plenty of highlights on this album, such as spirited takes of Lord of the Thighs, Sweet Emotion, Last Child, and others. By the way, the one single from Live Bootleg is Chip Away the Stone, which was the one new song here, written with band friend Richie Supa. If you've never heard it, Chip Away the Stone is a great lesser-known Aerosmith track that is worth seeking out. In general, at a time when most quote-unquote live albums were nothing more than studio-tinkered fabrications, live Bootleg captures what it was actually like to be at an Aerosmith concert. For this reason, the album succeeds and has actually aged a lot better than some of the so-called live albums of that time. In November of 1979, the band released In The Ruts. Do you get it? It's a spoonerism. Call me crazy, but I really like this album. And it's got no business being this good, because although he's seen on the album cover, this album saw the departure of Joe Perry halfway through the recording process. Joe quit after a band family altercation while on tour. Aerosmith had only been putting out albums for about 6 years at this point, and it appeared they were already finished as a creative unit. If that doesn't speak to the quality and quantity of drugs they were using, I don't know what does. Joe's place on guitar was taken by a few guitarists, including band friend Richie Supa and Jimmy Crespo, who was a very talented guitarist and would later go on tour with them. Luckily, Joe had already co-written enough songs and laid down enough guitar on most of the songs to give the album a somewhat cohesive feel. Lead track No Surprise, with a Z, and the track after it, Chiquita, are two very underrated songs. The boys also do a great job on a cover of the Shangri-La's Remember, Walkin' in the Sand, for which former Shangri-La's lead singer, Mary Weiss, provides uncredited backing vocals. Cheesecake is a gritty blues track with a tasty slide guitar from Joe. 3 Mile Smile is heavy as fuck. It's almost as if the boys took my advice from Draw the Line and front-loaded this album with some really killer tunes. Bone to Bone, Coney Island Whitefish Boy is a fun and funny tune that became a live staple for years. It kind of replaced Big 10-inch Record as their funny track. And Stevens' track Mia, which closes the album, is an engaging and dramatic ballad. Unfortunately, this album's lack of a big hit, coupled with Draw the Line's sales dip, saw the boys at their nadir professionally. Conversely, Joe's solo act, the Joe Perry Project, was tearing up nightclubs with an incendiary live show promoting their inspired debut album. In August of 1982, the band released Rock in a Hard Place. Jack Douglas was back in the producer's chair, but it didn't matter much. Here's all I'll say about this album. Brad Whitford left the band at the beginning of recording, but not before laying down guitar on one track, Lightning Strikes, which is the best song on the album, and the only song that Aerosmith ever did without Joe Perry that managed to get on the charts. Lightning Strikes is also notable for being Aerosmith's first ever proper video. I'm going to put a link below. It's pretty hysterical. Not just for the super fake lightning effects, but for the boys trying to dress up as gang members and looking more like rejects from Sha Na Na. And apparently the boys' enemy in this big gang rumble are a bunch of cantaloupes that get hit by baseball bats. As I said, I'll put the link below. You have to check it out. In November of 1985, the band released Done with Mirrors. This was produced by Ted Templeman. Yes, that Ted Templeman. The mind behind all of those Van Halen albums you love so darn much. After many managerial machinations, this album saw the return of both Joe Perry and Brad Whitford. Kick-ass lead-off track, Let the Music Do the Talking, which first appeared on the 1980 debut by the Joe Perry Project, appears here and gets things started right. I love the original version, but I always wished it had a better singer. Here it does. The rest of the tracks on this side are all solid, if not spectacular. Side 2 kicks off with Sheila by Brad and Steven, another highlight, showcasing an 80s guitar sound that is crisp and clean, yet doesn't fall prey to the overproduction that was rampant at the time. Thank you, Ted Templeman. The track She's on Fire is a Joe and Steven penned winner, with plenty of Get Your Wings grit under its fingernails. Steven is in great voice on this entire album, and the rhythm section is locked in tight. At a time when lots of hard-rocking acts were experimenting in the studio, the band deserves kudos for only swinging at pitches they can hit. In that regard, this album would be their Black and Blue, if you'll excuse a Rolling Stones reference. Unfortunately, though the album was solid, it was not the breakthrough comeback that the band was hoping for. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that in 1986, the band joined up with my beloved Run-DMC, and the two collaborated on a remake of Walk This Way. I understand if you love this song to death, and I understand if you hate this song with a passion. But everyone must agree that the video for Walk This Way is one of the greatest videos of all time. I love that it opens up with the two groups as neighbors who share a wall. What are the odds? What neighborhood is this? Not only that, but Aerosmith plays too loud for Run-DMC. Apparently Run-DMC likes their music at a reasonable level. I'll put a link below to the video. In any case, this remake introduced Run-DMC to the mainstream and introduced Aerosmith to an entire younger generation of fans. In August of 1987, the band released Permanent Vacation. Hey, remember that overproduction that I spoke about the band avoiding on Done With Mirrors? Found it! I'm mostly kidding. This album was produced by Bruce Fairbairn, fresh off his success on Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet album, and I'd be lying if I said this album didn't benefit from Bruce's bag of tricks. This album features the return of the old school Aerosmith logo, and with good reason. It's a return to form for the band, and Permanent Vacation is the true comeback album that Done With Mirrors was supposed to be. This album saw the band co-writing with other songwriters for the first time, so songwriters such as Desmond Child, Jim Vallance, and Holly Knight helped to grease the wheels creatively. Joe Perry and Desmond Child's Heart's Done Time is a great kickoff to this album. Ragdoll is the first of 3 classic songs on this album. It features righteously raunchy slide guitar and a top-shelf vocal performance from Steven. Speaking of great vocal performances, Dude Looks Like a Lady was the runaway success that put this album on the map. I remember being blindsided by the video one day and immediately feeling like the band had officially become relevant again. Aside from genius production on the backing vocals, guitar mix, and sax, Steven shrieks, yelps, screams, and scats his way through this song. I also have a spot in my heart for Steven's song, St. John, which is very easy on the ears. Angel is the 3rd classic on this album, and established a power ballad for the 80s, every bit as substantial as Dream On was for the 70s. In September of 1989, the band released Pump. There's no good way to say that. Pump. Guess who's shipping platinum again? Following the runaway success of Permanent Vacation, the band came back with an even stronger album. Pump saw the band kick down the doors of 1989's youth-addicted music scene, where the band would find success on their own terms. Not only that, but the band was about to become even more successful than they were before, which is crazy when you think about how big the band was in the 70s. Young Lust is a killer lead-off track, with the classic guitar sound that you've come to love from these guys. F.I.N.E. is classic Steven Tyler lyrical debauchery, tailor-made for a pre-woke decade. Love in an Elevator is exactly the kind of massive hit that the band needed on this album. And the song, not to mention its omnipresent video, was inescapable in its day. I can't tell you how ubiquitous this song was. Even for the time it was made, the production on the song is breathtaking. There's so much going on in that song, and it all works. Monkey on My Back sounds like a 70s throwback in the best possible way. Janie's Got a Gun was the other massive hit off this album, and it was built around another great Tom Hamilton riff. Janie wasn't just a brilliant song. It managed to do the impossible, which is to get extensive radio play with a song about incest and murder. It also ushered in the time of the serious video. Did I say Janie's Got a Gun was the other massive hit off this album? I completely forgot about the other side. The song is co-credited to Motown legends Holland Dozier Holland, but they weren't carpooling with Desmond Child and the other songwriters. They're credited because they threatened to sue the band for the melody in The Other Side being a little too close for comfort to their own Standing in the Shadows of Love. The production on The Other Side is great. The wonderful backing vocals and blasting saxophones that elevated Love in an Elevator are back, along with a fiery Joe Perry guitar solo. Great rockin' song. My Girl is an underrated Joe and Steven song. Don't Get Mad and Voodoo Medicine Man continue the hard rock vibe of this album. The song What It Takes, in my opinion, is the hidden gem on this album. I know it was a very successful song, but still, it's buried on this album, and it can't help but get overshadowed by the 3 big hits that precede it. What It Takes is a beautiful song, and I love it way more than any other Aerosmith ballad from the post-Reformation albums. In April of 1993, the band released Get a Grip. It continued Aerosmith's reign at the top of the charts, with songs like Livin' on the Edge, Cryin', and Crazy. And the band stayed true to their roots, with bluesier songs such as the title track and Gotta Love It. This album is one of Aerosmith's most successful ever albums, sales-wise. selling 7 million copies in the US and 20 million worldwide. From this point on, you knew what you were getting with Aerosmith. Radio-friendly power ballads, a few bluesy rockers, and some funky tracks laced with sexually charged innuendos. They'd continue this formula for years to come through the albums 9 Lives, Just Push Play, and Music from Another Dimension. All of those albums did very well. And your mileage may vary depending on what you like from Aerosmith. But for me, classic Aerosmith means their original run with Joe Perry. When he left Aerosmith, I left Aerosmith. I occasionally hop back in because they're just that good. That said, the band's comeback was for real, and those later songs still stand up as rock anthems. But my classic Aerosmith is 70s Aerosmith. What is your Aerosmith? It's 5 o'clock. Do you know where your Aerosmith is? That is it for this week on Pop Culture Graveyard. I hope you enjoyed this ridiculously long dive into Aerosmith, one of the most rewarding song catalogs in all of rock. If you enjoyed this video, please check out my other videos. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that little bell so you'll be alerted next time I drop a new video. I do that every Wednesday. If you would like to visit my Patreon and support the channel, I am putting a link right underneath in the description. And thank you for joining me. I will see you next week with a lot more cool stuff.